David Levine. Today is April 10th, 2022. I'm in San Diego at the American Association of Plastic Surgeons meetings, and it's my job, for me, a lucky, great job. I'm an interviewer of icons in plastic surgery. This program is basically to preserve in an audiovisual fashion icons in our field in different specialties of our field or subspecialties, leaders, academicians, forward thinkers, or a combination of all those above. And speaking of which, I have the honor today to interview Dr. Henry Kawamoto, DDS, MD, and a icon in craniofacial surgery. I would like to read a few things about him. These lists so long, like I was telling him earlier, I can't memorize them. And he said he couldn't either, so there, I don't feel so bad. Past president of the American Society of Maxillofacial Surgeons, the past president of the Society of Craniofacial Surgeons, past president of the California Society of Plastic Surgeons. He's had more than 100 peer-reviewed articles, and he served on editorial boards for PRS and the Journal of Cleft Palate and Craniofacial Surgery. We had a little bit of discussion, and I also have some other questions that I will ask him that one of the other physicians who helps us with this wanted me to ask. But basically, I'm going to start out with asking Dr. Kawamoto his full name, date of birth, and if you would like to mention your parents, family, and then we'll get into the meat of the interview.
Well, Henry Katsumi Kawamoto Jr. I was actually born in Long Beach, California, so a surfer boy from the very beginning, and wandered from the West Coast to the East Coast when I started my general surgery training. Okay.
And parents?
My father was a dentist, and my mother was a housewife, but she was pretty darn strict at times, and I thought pretty smart also.
Okay. I'm going to get into the main question of how you got into plastic surgery and ultimately maxillofacial surgery, and then we're going to get into the specific questions regarding that.
Yeah.
Because people that, when this interview is viewed at some point in history, they don't know the history.
Okay. What happened was, I was pre-med, and I was driving one time when I was 16 or 17. I hit a kid, and I took him to LA County Hospital, and fortunately there was nothing wrong with them. But I saw the carnage in the ER and all the blood, and I said, I don't want to go into medicine. I'm going to go into dentistry with my dad. And so I went to dental school after 2 years pre-dent, and graduated. But during the second year of dentistry, I went and saw an operation by the oral surgeon there, Marsh Robinson, and it was a jaw operation on my classmate. He was prognatic, and Marsh did one of his operations on him, and I said, God, that's pretty interesting, you know? So I decided I'll go into medicine and follow in his footsteps. And what happened was I was only a 2-year pre-dent, and I had to go to school at night in dental school in order to make up my units to get into medical school. And then once I got into medical school, I, for some reason, decided to go to the East Coast. And not having ever been there, it was sort of kind of a surprise move to my parents. And I applied all the way around, and I applied to Columbia Presbyterian very naively, because they had like a pyramid. It went from 10 first-year residents, interns, and it was cut to 4. And it just so happened that there was a spot in that 4.
I want to hear this, but what year was this?
This was, now you're really testing me, 65, I think.
Yeah, so the Vietnam War was almost full force, and that's why I brought that up, because you mentioned how you happened to get a spot where you...
Yeah, the Vietnam War was going on. At that time, they were not drafting, in California, they were not drafting people in training. And so I got that spot from being an outsider, and it was, I remember very well the interview for that slot, and it was the worst interview I ever had in my life. I mean, I got chewed up. I really got chewed up on the interview, and I had a classmate doing this internal medicine residency there, and I called him up right after. I said, you know, Dick, his name was Dick Benny. I said, I got blistered. It was the worst that I've ever had. I mean, it was a tough interview and blah, 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 but you know, I got the spot.
It wasn't as bad as you thought, I guess.
Well, it was, I felt bloodied when I left that place. And I remember the interview was Alfred Marquis, and about 20 years later, I'm being a visiting prof there. He's in the front row at Grand Rounds lecture.
Yeah.
And I relayed that story. We just laughed.
Yeah, life is interesting. So I'm going to ask you a question that was queried.
Come to think about, when I got there, another person came in back to the program. He had just spent his time at the Coast Guard. It was Joe McCarthy. So Joe McCarthy and I were co-residents all the way through general surgery. Became very good friends, and then at the time he went into plastics, he told me I had to go and go interview because there was one more spot there. I said, no, Joe, I want to get out of New York. You know, it's 4 years is enough. No, you go.
And the other thing, because see, that's what I love about these interviews. Say, I wanted you to tell us the residents that you were with, because you were with some icons. Again, just luck of the draw. But I knew each and every one. Sam Hammer, I know from Dallas, and of course we know the contributions he made. Would you quickly mention the different and where they ended up, and just a little bit about that, because you have contact with
you know what? I said, no, I don't want to go there. But, no, you go down to interviews. Joe said, no, go down to interviews.
At NYU.
NYU. With John Converse, the next day I get a phone call, you're accepted. And then I hemmed and hawed and discussed it with my wife. We want to get out of there, and for some reason I said, okay, and I took the spot. Well, that was quite a year, because it was the first year that Converse really had some good residents. That's what he told us. That was he thought he had his prime group this time. Well, there was Bruno Risto, who became a well-known aesthetic plastic surgeon in San Francisco. There was Sam Hammer, of course, in Dallas, Texas. There was Joe McCarthy and myself. So
you were the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse.
Well, I don't know about that, but everything ran very, very quickly and fast. You know, we were all on the same plane. Yeah. And then we had international fellows that year, Chin Wan Kim from Korea, who became sort of like the father of plastic surgery in Korea. Kasu Raposo de Amaral, who became a well-known craniofacial surgeon and has the only craniofacial hospital in the world in Campinas, Brazil. And the third person was Francois Firman, who became famous for years in breast reconstruction, and actually happens to be the godparent of my daughter, who was born in Paris when I was doing a fellowship.
Wow.
But, it was a group where you didn't have to finish the sentence to get onto the next page real quickly.
That was a great collection of minds.
It just click, 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 click. Yeah. And nobody, and we didn't know it at that time.
Sure.
We didn't know it at that time. In retrospect, yeah, it was great, but you're just sort of wandering in the pool and whatnot, and it just moved.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's it. And I brought that up because you were with a core group that changed the history of plastic surgery. Not just one that changed, but the whole group itself, aesthetic, reconstructive. That's an amazing combination. I doubt if there are many residencies that could claim that legacy. That's the word I'm looking for. I want to ask you how you became interested in craniofacial. I think you mentioned a little bit before the hurdles that were present on being a pioneer in a new specialty, both in the terms of your personal training and creating a training center. And you mentioned Dr. Tessier a little bit, because would you say he was the father of craniofacial?
For certain.
Okay.
For certain. It's very interesting. Tessier was a visiting professor at NYU, where he was talking about what he was doing at that time. I was on a family vacation during this whole week, so I missed him. Now, I was with the family, and we were in Bermuda, and relaxing out. So I missed this whole visiting professorship at NYU. And I decided I was interested in it, and my wife, bless her, she went along, and we decided to spend the next year after I finished in Paris. And my wife was just was the rock behind,
Well, that's often the case.
Huh?
That's often the case. Behind every great man is a woman.
We had a son in Tokyo, another son in Manhattan, and a daughter born in Paris.
Wow. What a life.
Her going through all that, having different obstetrician every time, different hospital, it was a hell. But what happened was kind of interesting, because Converse's father started the American hospital in Paris. Oh. And so when my wife was about to deliver, Converse said, you got to go and talk to this person who was head officer at the American hospital. And I went over there and introduced myself. He said, oh yeah, we're expecting your wife, and blah, 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 and whatnot. And so when my daughter was born there, my wife had like a suite. There were flowers all over the place. It was. She didn't want to come home.
Sent the baby home. He stayed.
Yeah,
He'll stay
to our little dinky 1.5 room apartment.
Interesting. Yeah. Another question was your recollections of the beginning of the American Society of Craniofacial Surgery, specifically as its first president.
Well, I thought it was important for us to have American representation in the field that was just blooming at that time. And we were in sort of competitions with the oral surgeons. We were trying to make inroads at that time. And I felt that it was important for us to capture this name, craniofacial, and keep it into plastic surgery. And that's why the society was formed.
I got you. So you could trademark it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And the year that it formed was what?
God. I want to say 74 or thereabouts.
See, and my question was, because I can't remember MRIs and CAT scans. Were they available, or did you just fly by the seat of your pants with an X-ray?
You know what?
Which is why I'm interested in the first craniofacial procedure.
Well, what's interesting is Tessier has spent $250,000 to produce a book. He has sent 3 of his co-workers, or residents, graduates, I should say, around the world to film skulls, deformed skulls. And he had written this book, and I saw it, In fact, I had to go back one time and spend a whole week editing it for him, and it was a beautiful book. And the prints were all from Switzerland, as I recall.
Remember the name of the book?
Pardon me?
The name?
No.
I'll Google it.
What's interesting was he had spent all this money on this. I was dragged back to Paris a couple times to help edit it. And then he abandoned the project.
Oh.
He abandoned the project. And when his wife, Mireille, brought up the thought of continuing and getting it published, when I did it, he called us stupid.
He called you stupid.
Yes, and his wife. Together, we were in the room, and he said what was in the book was became second fiddle because the CAT scans came out at that time.
Okay, so the question was pertinent then.
Yeah, we said no. I mean, they were beautiful. It was beautiful.
Man.
But he abandoned the damn
Where's
thing.
the book now?
I have no idea.
We've got to find the book.
I got to write to the wife and say, we got to get that thing
I'm
published.
serious. I'm sure that the art in it is just superb. And this is not off topic, but when I interviewed Dr. Edgerton, he had written a book about physical deformities and psychology, and he never published it. And I think Mark Constantian was going to talk to him about it or talk to the family because God rest his soul, Dr. Edgerton's not with us anymore. But I thought, how do you write a whole book and then never do anything with it? The political environment at that time regarding what he was doing, he didn't feel was right. Yours was, there was something better, which is not true. Because Da Vinci, he wouldn't abandon all his stuff because he said, well, now you got x-rays. You don't need my paintings.
I'm going to write to his wife, Mireille, and say, hey, Mireille, what's going on?
Please, and let me know. It's somewhere.
Yeah, it's somewhere.
It didn't get burned up. Somebody's got it put on a shelf, and God, what a beautiful, I'd be just interested to see it, and as part of our archives here. This is the beginning of the beginning in craniofacial. The other question was your thoughts on the ASCFS, the acronym for the American Society of Craniofacial Surgeons, and recently celebrated its 30th anniversary. To current members, to those who aspire to craniofacial surgery, what are your thoughts?
Well, it's kind of interesting now because certainly, I hate to say this, but I don't think it's as bright as it was in the future. And I gave a lecture the features talk at the American Society of Cleft Lip and Palate and Craniofacial Surgery. And I said, the problem now in craniofacial surgery is there are too many training programs. There are less patients. And in the future, there's going to be less patients with ultrasound, contraceptive devices, and you're going to go on and on and on. It is my understanding that cleft lip and palate fell something like 47% in 1 year in one of the Asian countries. And you know why?
Abortion, I would guess.
Ultrasound.
Yeah, but they
and abortion. So as things continue like that, we're going to see less and less congenital deformities. And we're not going to see these birth defects because of drugs and what have you.
That's making an assumption that Roe versus Wade doesn't get overturned. That's
a different subject.
Yeah. But I get what you're saying. Yeah. Let me make sure I don't miss any of the notes I wrote down here. Well, obviously your contributions have been great. I'm going to get back into some of the regular questions because you started out in a field that was new and amazingly forward thinking with a lot of fortitude when you start moving the facial bones around. I think Milton Edgerton did a hypertelorism back in the 60s, and that was a Reader's Digest story. It was so famous. But what things do you feel that or your disappointments of how something would go one way, but you want it one way or went the other? Just any major disappointments as you were along that road just to pass on in your quest to become a craniofacial surgeon?
You know, I can't really think of any major disappointments.
Great.
Yes, when something goes wrong, you have to think about it as a learning experience and figure out why it happened and how to do it better and how to avoid it in the future. But I can't really think of any major catastrophic events. Maybe it's because of my age and I'm more forgetful, but I've always had pretty good support around me, keep me out of trouble, like the fellows. And
well,
they're good.
When you answered that in my head, I thought, yeah, because if you're going into this field, it's not like you wake up one morning and say, I'm going to be a craniofacial surgeon.
No.
Go find me a croissant. And it takes a tremendous amount of and I want you to mention the conjoined twins, planning. And people see the end result, get to see snippets of a 12-hour operation, but don't understand the massive work. That's why I asked you about Dr. Tessier. They didn't have MRIs, and what did he do? He did the old-fashioned dissect, till everything is secondary. Yeah, we can move this. You don't have a lot of room for error in the craniofacial area, particularly where the brain, everything has to fit back together if you're moving those bones. But would you mind going into that a little bit?
Well, you know the anatomy pretty well. You know where the safe zones are, and you know where your landmarks are, and you could keep out of trouble.
The conjoined twins you had, were they brachycephalic? Were they?
They were stuck at the top, at the vertex.
Yeah, what would you call that? What is the name? You know, the medical name if they're joined at the skull.
Craniopagus.
Craniopagus. Yeah. Okay.
And it turns out that's the most favorable connection, with the connected at the top, not at the sides and whatnot. This my neurosurgical colleague Jorge Lazarus said to me, "Are you interested in doing this?" I said, "Sure, why not?" You know, not knowing what we're getting into. So the twins were shipped up from Guatemala in a private jet, and the donor of that jet didn't ever want to be mentioned. But I'm going to mention him anyway.
Okay.
Okay. It was Mel Gibson.
Oh, okay.
He wanted no goddamn publicity about it at all. But he was essentially the backer of this whole thing, the financing and everything. And after his separation, I met him a couple of times. He's a real decent person. I mean, there was a lot of bad press about him, crashing in.
I know.
It was actually in front of my house.
They're not perfect, are they? They're just human. Yeah.
But what a great person. I mean, nice person. I've met him on several occasions because at the birthday dates of the twins, he would come and whatnot. At any rate, the twins came, and it was a time when there was breakthroughs in radiology. We started having the 3D CAT scans, and then we could send that out to a company that would make models of them, and so we could plan on the models how to do
3D
the
imaging.
3D imaging, and all that really helped us to visualize what the hell's going on. Kind of an interesting story is I had these sets of skulls, and we used them to plan the incisions and all this, and the designs of the flap and whatnot. And Saturday morning, the operation was going to be on Monday. Saturday morning, we snuck up on the kids, and I had these flaps designed on felt, and put them on the head to see if they woke up. But I realized that the flaps weren't going to work.
Better before than after or during.
Yeah, and I was so upset. Couldn't figure out why. Well, simple reason. The flaps would work. We just had to make them bigger because the skull grew in that time.
Ah, okay. And you couldn't use tissue expanders.
We did use tissue expanders. We did use it. But, just that making the patterns on the original CAT scan.
You forgot the one little thing that they
grow.
Yeah.
Grew, yeah. And it was...
they were obviously thriving.
Yeah, and I was so relieved. I was really relieved that...
I see, because the die cut you took out was their old heads.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, okay. I think I know what you might say, but maybe it'll be different. But do you feel this is the most important innovation in our specialty, or what do you think is our most important innovation?
Well, I think in my career time, the two most important innovations in plastic surgery was, of course, craniofacial surgery and microsurgery.
Yeah, that pops up every...
that opened a whole new field for our specialty. And it was great to be there and see it all blossom. And of course, we're going to have more and more of this kind of advancement and whatnot in the future, but I think a couple of them coming within 2 years or 3 years of each other was just a magical time.
Okay, yeah. And I think I asked you the question that you wanted me to ask, but let me look there, because I don't want to get through this. Because you specifically, I think I've asked you the questions that were before. Let me see. It was a letter that you wrote to the society. I think we went over it. Specifically a question, I think, about the beginning of the Craniofacial Society. Do you remember what question that was? You had emailed.
Why we formed it?
Yeah. We did cover it. Okay. Sometimes in these things I get so interested that as we move off of a topic into something new that I forget about the questions I asked before. Okay, I was going to ask about paradigm shifts in plastic surgery, but I think you've discussed that. The most important innovation we've discussed. Your greatest professional accomplishment?
I think training the fellows.
How many have you trained?
33. It's kind of interesting, I used to, all the fellowships used to start July 1 after they finished their training. I decided we're going to start our fellowship on the 15th of July. The rationale was if they came from the East Coast to the West Coast, they'll have time to settle down, find an apartment, and whatnot. It turns out they were so goddamn compulsive. They would be there anyway on July 1.
Of course they are. Yeah, yeah.
They'll be there on July 1, and they had 2 weeks to be taught by the guy leaving all all the nuances, my idiosyncrasies and whatnot,
Right.
that I didn't have to do.
Right.
And on top of that, it created a 2-week bonding from the guy leaving and the guy coming in.
Yes. Yeah.
And it
Seemed like a good idea at the time.
I don't understand why all fellowships aren't like that.
Yeah.
You know, if you're doing a micro, well, just stagger the time, and they have time to not only adjust to the new environment, but get to know the ropes.
Okay, question a little bit on the other side. What do you think is the greatest mistake as a specialty, plastic surgery? As plastic surgeons, what is our greatest failure mistake? Just in your view, and you may have none for that. Or your most greatest professional disappointment, one or both.
You know, when I was in New York with Converse, there was a movement, there was a period where this so-called rivalry between ENT and plastic surgery could have been washed out.
Right.
At that time, the head person on the ENT side was John Conley. All right? Conley and Converse were good friends. And Conley's son-in-law, I think, was Dan Baker. So it could have been patched over at that.
I didn't realize that.
It could have been patched over at that time. And our leaders at that time, it didn't work because, you know, Converse was sort of looked upon as sort of a maverick in our specialty. He was not well liked at that time. I can tell you that. I can tell you a great story about Converse.
Oh, I'd like to hear it.
I'm scrubbed with them at the sink, and I said, Dr. Converse, you know, you'll have to excuse me next week. I have to do my boards in general surgery up in Boston. He said to me, of course, you have to get the boards out of the way as soon as possible. And then he told me, when he took the plastic surgery boards, he had already written Kazanjian Converse. So he knew all about the maxillofacial area and blah, blah, blah. And he studied like hell because he knew they were going to be after him. Because he was not well liked when he went to New York. So he studied everything. He went into the boards. The first question they asked him was the anatomy of the foot, which he didn't know.
Well, I would have flunked that one too.
And they flunked him.
Really? Oh, somebody was mad. Interesting. He flunked his oral boards
He
first
flunked
time.
his oral boards, and I don't think that's ever recorded in history, but he told me that.
Now, I'll tell you what's interesting. People that will look at this don't know that the name Converse, he wrote the quintessential textual volume that every resident had.
Exactly.
Now he does it, I don't think, it was 7 volumes, one on hand, one on congenital, one on cosmetic. And I think I still have them. Now they're antiques, and I'm not sure that they're even in publication anymore.
No, they're not.
Everybody got Converse's book.
Yeah. And I have a couple autographed copies.
There you go. Who would you say you admire most professionally? Or personally?
Oh, that's a hard question. That's a hard question. You know, I've been fortunate to be around really giants, and they all had a certain effect on me. And it's hard to say.
Fair enough.
Hard to say.
Yeah. Was it, who was it that said, if I see farther, it's because I stand on the shoulders of giants? I forgot who it wasn't. It wasn't Da Vinci. I can't remember who said that.
Right,
but,
right.
Or maybe it was Newton. But anyway, yes. Yeah. And that's why we're here, because You guys are the giants.
You don't think yourself as that. It's just one of those things. But I've been really fortunate in being around really good people, not only as peers, but my students that get me out of trouble.
Sure.
So it's a combination of many things.
What about words of wisdom for present and future generations of plastic surgeons? Any words you'd like to impart there?
Just get the best training you can get a hold of, and keep your mind open. There's so many avenues you could go in plastic surgery, and it's not a field that's going to collapse. It's just going to continue to grow. Yes, there's going to be inroads by other specialties in our field, but there's always other fields that we can get into also.
Imitation's a serious form of flattery.
Pardon me?
Imitation is a serious form of flattery. Are you retired now?
Yes.
What do you do?
Nothing.
Okay, I know you don't do nothing. Is there? You have interest in art, or you actually do kayaking? I saw that.
I did kayaking. What happened is where I kayak from has been closed for because of the COVID. So 2 years. So I haven't been kayaking too much, but I do use rowing machine every day. I do 45 minutes on a Concept 2 rowing machine to keep in shape. So when I get back on the water, I can do it again. And I miss kayaking. I did some things like paddling from Los Angeles to Catalina, which is a 26-mile water channel with groups, and people say, "Well, how can you do that? It's 8 hours or 12 hours on the water." But it's just a camaraderie and going out there and being in the sun and trying to avoid the tankers going by that can't see you nor stop at all. It's just a peaceful, great body exercise.
Well, you mentioned something which was one of my questions before I get to your predictions for plastic surgery in the next quarter century, but how did COVID affect you? Were you working during COVID, or you were retired by then?
Right.
So did that change your life? Or for
COVID?
me, I just...
No, not at all.
Yeah, okay.
Well, not at all. I mean, when you're retired, you're sort of confined anyway. And no, I just stayed at home all that time and had no problems at all.
Well, tell me your predictions in the next quarter century that you feel for plastic surgery.
Wow, I never thought about that. Well, we're going to certainly go into more computers and that kind of planning. Of course, there'll be new drugs coming out that we'll be using, and one of the things that we'll probably see as more competitions from other groups, but plastic surgery has always been able to come up above it and go on to the next level. So I don't see the demise of plastic surgery that others have seen in the past and predicted. I just see it just growing more. And in fact, when you look at this meeting, or any of the meetings now, is changed radically from the time I was training to now. I mean, look at the number of women in plastic surgery. Phenomenal.
Right.
I mean, when I was a resident, there were none in my residency class, except maybe Francois Firmin, who was an international fellow that year. But now, at least
Yeah,
half of them.
when I took my boards, Mary McCarthy was there.
Oh yeah.
I think that's the only woman I can remember. I mean but this was back in the early '70s. So yeah,
Oh yeah.
it's grown.
It's really grown. It's really grown.
Well, Henry, this has been a great interview. I appreciate
thank you.
it. Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Not
For
really.
posterity,
I mean, we
okay.
sort of covered a lot of things, and no, I must say I never regretted choosing this field, and it's a field that continues to grow, and more interesting, continues to challenge us.
Yes. Yeah.
That's where the excitement is, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, thank you, sir. What a pleasure.
Oh, thank you.
That will end our interview. During a break, Dr. Kawamoto and I were discussing the SMILE, Operation SMILE.
Yeah.
Bill McGee, whose name has come up in several of these interviews. If you listen to all of them, his name comes up constantly because he's a leader in that. And you wanted to say something about Bill.
Yeah, well, Bill and I have been friends for a long time, and one time I had this Israeli woman approach me. It was right after separation of the Conjoined twins, and she wanted to help out the children that were maybe injured by the war in Iraq. And she has connections and start working through it. And somehow I heard that Bill McGee was doing the same thing, trying to go there. And this was right towards the end of the war. And somehow we got connected. And I know Bill for a long, long time. And we went together to Iraq right after the war, and to see what needs to be done. And what Bill wanted to do was make artificial ears, because Saddam punishment for
Cutting off
being a
the
traitor
ear.
was cut off the ear. So he wanted to do that. The woman that was sponsored me wanted me to, see if any war injuries and whatnot were there to be treated. It was quite an experience, I'll tell you. They wouldn't let us stay in Iraq, but we stayed in Bahrain and flew every day from Bahrain to Basra or to the capital in Iraq. And I'll tell you, I remember when we first landed from Bahrain to Basra, it was a brand new airport that was never used for 10 years or something like that. There were people that were supposed to service the airport, but they would just sit in the corner, do nothing. And we collected our baggage. And the first thing that happened to us after we got our bags, the guards came and put a flak jacket on us.
Yeah.
I said, whoa, this is not going to be fun. we walked out of the airport, and each one of us had a bodyguard.
Right.
With the machine gun. It was pretty hairy and scary, but we were never able to, or Bill was never able to get that ear project going.
So you just got in a plane and came home?
We were scouting the landscape.
Yeah.
And I remember we went to the hospital in Basra, and it was empty. They had a bunch of bird machines and respirators, but because of the various wars, they had no parts.
Yeah. supply.
There were, all of them were on the side. And there was a person intubated in the ICU. There was one person in the ICU intubated, but no ventilator.
Or were they just masked?
Nothing. Intubated.
Amazing.
Amazing, yeah.
Okay. Well, great. Thank you.